Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, just to let you know, there will be no more Perspectives this week as we're taking a well-earned break. Yep, it's actually pretty hard work putting the show together each day, so we just wanted to sneak away just for a few days to recharge the batteries. But we will be back next Tuesday, zinging with energy and ready once again to spread the good word. But the good news is we are here today with another packed show to keep you going on with. So today we will be talking about interesting meetings between the US government and Punjab's farmers. What could that be about? And yes, just when you thought Kangana Ranaut couldn't upset the Sikh community anymore, well, our old nemesis is back with a vengeance. And this time her latest film will be enough to make any Sikh's blood boil in their veins. Meanwhile, Mr. Modi is on his travels once again, pretending to be a world statesman, leading the world's largest, well, at least as he calls it, democracy. And as we've often reported, the northwest of India is known for producing heroic and indeed stoic sportsmen and women. Well, the Paralympics has produced something pretty special this year. More on that later. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there this morning.
Indeed, and together James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we will take a look at lots of your wonderful comments that have been coming in by the bucketful beneath our video, so thank you very much for those. So let's move on with today's show. James, what have you got to start us off with today?
Well, we often report on the Jammu region, and it isn't always good. But today I thought we'd bring you a very enlightening and inspiring story of a young athlete, Sheetal Devi, at the Paralympic Games. And I'm going to bring the story up on screen because I just thought that this was very inspiring. But what really is amazing is that she is an archer. And she is ranked one of the top in the world when it comes to Paralympic sports. Now, the big thing is that she does not have arms. She uses her feet and her mouth to operate the bow, and it's a compound. So it takes a great amount of strength to pull back on the bow and to have that force and that power that she's using her teeth to pull it back with, and without arms, is just amazing. She is going for the gold at this year's Paralympic Games, and I mean, how can you be anything but awe-inspired by an individual who I would never associate someone with no arms as a world-class archer. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And to me, it's inspiring. But can you imagine how inspiring that must be to her community and to others with disabilities? I mean, it just goes without words. So to see her win the gold would be something just amazing at this year's Paralympic Games. Angus, I mean, what do you think of this? This is just amazing inspiration, I think, to the entire Jammu region, but India and the world.
Yeah, if you've ever pulled back a large bow, like a competition bow, the strength required, even just for a normal able-bodied person, is shocking, actually. Yeah, I mean, what an inspiring story this lady has. I mean, the real achievement here is, of course, you know, India doesn't have the resources that many Western countries do for helping their Paralympic athletes. So, of course, she has not only had to overcome just the sheer difficulty of trying to enter a sport, you know, not being able-bodied, but also the resources. She doesn't have that backing that would otherwise be perhaps available here in the West. So she's come from Jammu without the resources. She's had to do everything she can, and of course her family have rallied around in the most incredible way to give her this opportunity. Yeah, it points to many things. Firstly is, of course, her individual spirit, resilience, ambition. It's deeply inspiring. Secondly, it is, once again, we always talk about the northwest of India. and its heritage. There is something genetic in the people of northwest India. They are powerful, they are stoic, they are heroic in so many ways. There's obviously something in the genes of the people from that region. But yeah, this lady has, she's reached great heights, deservedly so. And of course, we do wish her the very best of luck. And we'll report, hopefully, on her results. We'll see how she does.
Absolutely. We'll definitely follow that up when we come back next week and just see how she does. And also all of the other celebrated athletes who have partaken in the Olympic Games this year and the Paralympic Games. And congratulations to all of the Olympic athletes, no matter where they are coming from in the world. But this one just really, I found inspiration in and wanted to share that story as a true, happy, feel-good story for the day.
Indeed, a good one, James.
So let's move along. We're going to take a look at Mr. Modi trying to make himself seem as the peacekeeper for Russia and Ukraine. Now, he tells Vladimir Zelensky that he's ready to help them bring peace and find a solution to the issues going on there. Of course, we know that tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed, as with Russian soldiers. This has been going on for several years, and it is an atrocious attack on a sovereign nation by Russia to go in and start annexing land and property. And of course, at the end of the day, it comes down to resources that Russia really wants to control, as well as the ports. And that is a big thing. Now, of course, we know that that Vladimir Putin had thought he was going to walk in and just take over and own basically everything within days, which of course did not happen. Now, Mr. Modi is showing up in Ukraine, and he is acting as though he is a peacemaker. So it's really interesting that it's happened just weeks after his visit to Russia and his negotiated talks about trade and other industry and governmental or diplomatic agreements with Putin. And now he's over in Ukraine trying to save some face with other world leaders who were very upset that he had made that trip, very upset that he is continuing to enable and by proxy finance part of that war by including or continuing trade with Russia. So these are very big concerns, but at the same time, anything that any world leader can do to help end the atrocities and the war going on in Ukraine, I'm all for. And I really hope that there is something that he is bringing in terms of a message from Putin that can open the door to a diplomatic resolve of this situation. I spent some time in Ukraine at in the first 3 months of the war that was going on, and as Russia was invading. I've seen the burned bodies. I've seen the death. I've seen the executions. And it's not something that you're ever going to forget. So it is something that really, in my heart, I hope to see an end to. But I'm not going to hold my breath in placing my confidence that Modi is going to be the one to bring peace to the region. It's just not a realistic option in my mind. But again, I'm open to any solution that helps to save lives and bring peace to both sides, because lives are being lost needlessly in this war that's been going on for way too long.
Yeah, Ukraine, a very complex situation, much as the media like to paint it as a simple black and white. It is definitely not a black and white war. There are lots of shades of grey in this one. Yeah, interesting that Mr. Zelensky, again, it's media interpretation, but there is a phrase there that that they are reporting that Mr. Zelensky frowned when meeting Mr. Modi. Now, again, that may be just because the sun was in his eyes or whatever. But of course, we mustn't forget that Narendra Modi was seen only a few weeks ago actually embracing, hugging Mr. Putin. So, of course, Mr. Zelensky is going to be slightly uncomfortable, should we say, with Mr. Modi's presence, certainly after he's come from the Kremlin and his arms warmly embracing Mr. Putin. So I'm sure Mr. Zelensky will be keeping Mr. Modi at slightly arm's length in terms of this. Also, he will be very much aware that across the battlefield, the tanks and missiles raining down upon him will be partially financed, of course, by Mr. Modi. Because, of course, Narendra Modi's India has been buying Russian oil against the international sanctions, trying to isolate Russia over this conflict. Mr. Modi he's trying to stride the global stage. He's trying to portray himself as this global statesman. Well, it's all very well doing that, but of course, one has to ask firstly, whose loyalty is Mr. Modi aligned with? It certainly doesn't seem to be with Ukraine. It's very clearly with Mr. Putin's Russia. And secondly, Mr. Modi also comes from a nation not known for its democratic values, much as it likes to say otherwise. Of course, we report on a daily basis how India is sinking away, is sliding away from democracy, and in fact moving more towards a Russian model of society. So again, I think Mr. Zelensky will be, again, a little bit sceptical of the influence and power of Mr. Modi. Because, of course, on the other hand, in this whole conflict, we mustn't forget, let's be more balanced about this. Like I said at the beginning, it is not a black and white conflict. It is very clear that the West are very keen to feed this war machine. I mean, how many billions of dollars worth of arms and ammunition and hardware, military hardware, is being poured into Ukraine? How many jet fighters, tanks, missiles, and of course just basic ammunition, infantry ammunition, is being supplied to Ukraine to feed this war machine? There doesn't seem to be much efforts at reaching a peace agreement here, other than from the West. We just seem to be feeding this war machine. And of course, depending on your conspiracy theory of choice, it is the world's largest financial laundromat. Yes, indeed, there are those who deeply believe that Ukraine is a very useful money laundering exercise for many of the wealthy in the West. So, unfortunately, as always, it is the 1% gaining from the 99%'s misery. Whichever side of this conflict that you particularly align with, don't forget that these are people's sons and daughters dying in Ukraine, both on the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side, just to feed the machine and the wealth and the greed of the 1%. So, unfortunately, there is no black and white. There is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. It is simply just a horrible war that needs to end. And Mr. Modi, well, do we trust him? I'm not so sure. But yeah, an interesting perspective, James. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Angus.
Okay, let's move on to my first story, and let's move towards the Punjab. Well, there is a character, a figure in the Punjab in India, who has cropped up on our show on a irregular basis, but who seems to ignite the ire, that's an understatement, of those in our audience. And of course, that is Kangana Ranaut. Now, Kangana Ranaut is a Hollywood actress who, for some reason, she has an absolute mission in her life to upset and attack the Sikh community. She holds a very powerful and influential position. She's a very popular actress in India. She has millions of followers, and not only that, she is now a member of the Lok Sabha. Yes, she is an elected member of Parliament of the lower house in India. So she carries a lot of weight, and she is using this weight to try and turn as many Indians against the Sikh community as possible. And of course, her films are boycotted in the Punjab for this very reason. Well, just when you thought that she just couldn't get any worse, well, let me read you some statements from some of the Sikh organisations that have been released over the last few days about her latest film. Well, the SGPC, they've just released a statement calling for a new biographic film based on former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Yes, of all subjects that she's picked, it's Indira Gandhi, that nemesis of the Sikh community. So the SGPC are calling for this film to be banned immediately for being anti-Sikh. And the statement a few days ago came after recently released clips of this film show Sikh characters as bloodthirsty terrorists attacking the Indian public. So this new upcoming film called Emergency has this infamous Hindutva actress Kangana Ranaut, who's recently been elected as an MP in the Hindu-populated Mandi constituency up in Himachal Pradesh, has depicted Sikhs once again in a poor light. And she's tried to malign the image of the community martyrs by presenting them as villains. If you're going to really upset Punjabis and particularly Sikhs, then you're going to pick their martyrs and portray them as villains. I mean, that you could not do anything more offensive and insulting. And this is what she's done. And unsurprisingly, the Sikh community is absolutely enraged over this latest movie and, of course, are seeking to ban it. Now, here's where it gets really personal on behalf of Kangana Ranaut. She not only directed the film, she also plays the role of the key character Indira Gandhi. Yes, so she is actually playing this infamous character Indira Gandhi, this nemesis of the Sikh community. So the film was initially planned to be released in October last year, but in fact was then rescheduled for the 14th of June 2024. Now, of course, June 2024, why June? Well, it just happens to be the 40th anniversary of Operation Blue Star. So she very clearly rescheduled the release of this film to coincide with Operation Blue Star. If you don't think anything could get more personal and offensive, well, she just managed to do it. So well done, Miss Kangana Ranaut. You've managed to really upset an awful lot of people with this. So it is now scheduled. It was originally scheduled for June, but it had to be delayed because of the elections, and now it is rescheduled for release on September the 6th, so next week. But its trailer, and this is the trailer that's upset everybody, was released a couple of weeks ago. So now, Indira Gandhi, as we all know, has been this person who has managed to specifically target the Sikh nation for many years, and culminating in the dreadful events of 1984, that horrible attack on the Harmandir Sahib, which of course led to her own demise. She was then assassinated in retaliation, in revenge for that massacre of Sikhs at the Golden Temple. And but she, Indira Gandhi, was also reviled universally by many in India, specifically also across the Sikh nation, but for many reasons, not least because she was responsible for the forced sterilisation of millions of lower caste Indians. And she also plunged the freedom of the press in India to lower levels. I mean, she again was a character very much like Narendra Modi. She hated the free press, so she did her very best to suppress the free press. She was also responsible for arresting countless members of her opposition, including leading politicians. And of course, she was a classic right-wing politician. She attacked the trade unions. She destroyed many of their rights, particularly the Indian lower classes who were members of the trade unions. So, of course, she has, Indira Gandhi has become this figure so reviled by Sikhs ever since. And this film, again, if it couldn't get any worse, apparently in this film, they also portray Satjanel Singh Bhindranwale with another character. Of course, Bhindranwale was this heroic figure, this heroic folklore character who was this head of the resistance, this heroic character, this heroic soldier who was finally attacked in the Golden Temple, put up this heroic resistance, and of course he was martyred in June 1984, along with many of his co-fighters. But this film depicts Bhindranwale with another actor, and this is, again, an offence to the Sikh nation and the Sikh community, because according to Sikhs, it is depicting any of their martyrs by an actor is seen as a violation, is seen as a sacrilege. And again, this is a very deliberate act on behalf of Kangana Ranaut to offend and attack Sikhs. So another statement, of course, has been released by the Jathedar of the Akal Takht, Jani Ragbir Singh. And the Akal Takht's Jathedar has said, Sikhs can never tolerate imitation of their martyrs in films. In Kangana Ranaut's upcoming film Emergency, Bhindranwale has been distorted. What a surprise. On one hand, the Indian Censor Board is not giving permission to release a movie made on human rights by human rights activist Jaswant Singh Kalra. And Kalra has just released a new film highlighting the dreadful acts, the dreadful oppression of human rights in the Punjab, particularly in the 1980s and 90s. And in this film, he exposed the inhuman phenomenon of extrajudicial killing of Sikh youths in their thousands. in fake police encounters and disposing of their dead bodies by calling them unidentified dead bodies in the 1980s and 90s. And even after having made 80 cuts in this film to try and please the censor board, they still refused to release it. And yet, on the other hand, this offensive film, Emergency, released by Kangana Ranaut, has been released without any cuts, has been released, yeah, no problem, you can offend the whole Sikh nation, you can portray Indira Gandhi as some heroic figure, and you can completely betray the Sikh nations and the truth, of course. It's a complete misinformation. It's a complete, one assumes, around about an hour and a half of utter propaganda to portray the Sikhs as terrorists and bad people. It's a smear campaign, again, endorsed and approved by the Indian government, and particularly their tool, the Indian Censor Board. So the Jathedar said the release of this movie presents false facts about the Sikh community by ignoring the context of the frenzied attack on the Sri Darbar Sahib in June 1984. And it has, of course, hurt sentiments of the Sikhs. I would suspect that is an understatement. We will never tolerate the act of distorting the image of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. The Jathedar said if the government doesn't immediately remove the objectionable scenes in the film Emergency, which represent the image and history of Sikhs, then this gets ominous. The government will be directly responsible for any consequences that may arise. So be warned, Indian government. And the SGPC President Harjinder Singh Dhami also said in the SGPC's statement, this film has been made by actress Kangana Ranaut, who remains in controversy due to her anti-Sikh and anti-Punjab expressions, with the intention of deliberately character assassinating Sikhs, which the Sikh community cannot tolerate. Creating an anti-Sikh narrative about the great martyrs of June 1984, this is a despicable act of disrespecting the community. I would say disrespecting, again, is an understatement. The community can never forget the anti-Sikh brutality of June 1984, and Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale has been declared a Qawmi Shaheed, that's a community's martyr, by the Akal Takht, while Kangana Ranaut's film is trying to malign his character. And the president also said that the Kangana Ranaut has often deliberately made expressions that provoke the sentiments of Sikhs, but instead of taking action against her, the government is protecting her. As I've just said, yeah, indeed, there is evidence now that the government is endorsing, it is validating the message being portrayed in this film, this misinformation once again in this film. And the president also said that the government should file a case against Kangana Ranaut for inciting religious sentiments of Sikhs for her act through the film Emergency. Well, good luck with that. Clearly, they're not going to do that. Other quotes. One comes from the newly elected MP for Faridkot, Sarabjit Singh Khalsa, who indeed is, of course, the son. His father was Beyant Singh, who was one of the assassins of Indira Gandhi herself, and who himself was martyred. And Sarabjit Singh Khalsa also said, if Sikhs are filmed as terrorists in this film, then it is a deep conspiracy. This film is a psychological attack to create hatred towards Sikhs among other communities. The government should take prior notice and ban this movie. And he added, there has been hate crimes against Sikhs, and this film will only spread hatred towards the community. Objectionable films should be banned to maintain communal harmony and ensure law and order. A very measured, a very sensible and a very diplomatic statement. But basically, it very diplomatically says, look, this film is a deliberate act to try and stir up hatred against the Sikh community. Kangana Ranaut, on Twitter recently, she made the following tweet. She said, Khalistani terrorists may be arm twisting the government today, but let's not forget one woman, the only woman Prime Minister, and then a bit of Hindi. No matter how much suffering she's caused this nation, she crushed them like mosquitoes at the cost of her own life. So Kangana Ranaut refers to the Sikhs who were fighting for their own basic human rights as mosquitoes. And she said they were crushed by Indira Gandhi. She says this with pride. So it's no wonder that Sikhs in the Punjab and globally really are deeply offended by this woman, this Kangana Ranaut, who clearly has absolutely no idea of the suffering and the massacre that took place in 1984, who has been living this glamorous, protected cotton wool life in her Hindu arrogance, then makes these mad statements, these completely ignorant statements, offensive, deeply offensive to a whole community. And she's now an elected MP. She has absolutely no idea how to represent any community other than her own narrow-minded, obsessive anti-Sikh view. This woman really needs to get out in the real world, travel around the Punjab herself and just actually see firsthand just what is going on in real life, not in her protected little Hollywood bubble. So, of course, she's upset many people across the world, not just in India. And Rihanna, apparently the pop idol Rihanna, took her to task, and Ranaut called Rihanna a fool for defending the Sikh nation and said no one's talking about it because they're not farmers. This is in reference to the farmers' protests, of course. No one is talking about the farmers' protests because they're not farmers. They're terrorists who are trying to divide India so that China can take over our vulnerable, broken nation and make it a Chinese colony, much like the USA. Sit down, you fool. We're not selling our nation like you dummies. That was to Rihanna. So this is Kangana Ranaut, who has swallowed so much Hindu RSS propaganda. She is spouting absolute nonsense. This woman is... it's terrifying that a young woman can be so indoctrinated by RSS propaganda that she's making statements like this. And recently she was slapped by a Central Industrial Security Force lady. Of course, we reported on that wonderful lady at the airport in the Punjab, one of the airports in the Punjab, who slapped Kangana Ranaut, it was Chandigarh Airport, over her comments over the farmers' protests in 2020 and 2021. So I don't even need to say any more than I've said already, James. I think this woman is really setting herself up for a fall. This woman is really, I don't think she realizes the anger that she has generated by making these really irresponsible statements. I mean, at just a fundamental level, as now an elected MP, she has a responsibility to spread calm. She has a responsibility to make diplomatic statements, to spread, to try and bring and unite communities together. And yet she is still spouting stuff like this. And yet she is still producing films that are so incredibly offensive to a huge section of the Indian nation. Frankly, I think she's going to deserve whatever it is that she's ever going to get, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And, it'll be interesting to find out who's actually financing this production. And, the executive producers have a lot to lose if the movie doesn't get released. And, of course, we know that, those with the money in India are the ones that get to call the shots. Now, as it goes, I mean, I've appeared in hundreds of different productions and a member of the Actors Union. It really is essential to really use your mind, your ethics, and your heart to just back out of productions that you don't agree with. But in this case, she seems to be wholeheartedly brought into the mix, and she seems to believe the crap that she's spewing. And that makes her even more dangerous when it comes to the impact and the influence that she has on the next generation, because they're talking out both sides of their head, that they are not bringing real facts and they haven't taken the time to actually learn the history and what it is that they are actually portraying. And that is a dangerous part of the world of media these days, Angus.
Yeah, I think she needs to be very careful, because it was one thing when she was a Bollywood actress and an influencer making grandiose, arrogant statements. You do that as an influencer, that's one thing. She is now an elected member of the Lok Sabha. She has a responsibility. She needs to grow up, basically, and realise the responsibilities that come with such a position. She cannot make such provocative and offensive statements as a public figure now. She is an elected member of the parliament in India. So with that comes responsibility. So she needs to be very careful. And I would also warn her that even here in the West, in the UK, we had an MP, tragically, who was murdered by a man with a mental illness. And it was blamed on a right-wing person who actually clearly had a mental illness. But because of this MP's statements, and they were not provocative in any huge way, but she had said a few things. Of course, that doesn't justify what happened. But she was murdered by a right-wing guy who had who was mentally disturbed, and that was it. And India it has people with mental illnesses. So be careful, Miss Ranaut. Just as a genuine warning to you, you cannot, as a public figure, make statements like this because there are lunatics out there. Of course, you've offended the whole Sikh nation. That's one thing. But there will be people out there who aren't terrorists, but who will take action, direct action. So again, as a public figure, you've just got to be a little bit more measured, a little bit more sensible, a little bit more mature about what you do as a member of parliament. So let that stand as a warning.
And there's a reason why they call it an elected leader. Excuse me, because you're supposed to lead all people that you represent in peace, in improvement, in being their best. And this definitely is the opposite of that.
And of course, here in the West, any of our MPs coming out with statements like she does would be reprimanded immediately, firstly by the media, who would turn on her, saying, "Yo, you can't say stuff like that," but also her own party. Why are her own party not reprimanding her, saying that you cannot make statements like this, you cannot act like this, you cannot say things like this in public, because not only are you offending people, you are bringing our party into disrepute. There is a responsibility here, a collective responsibility. And it's disappointing, as an understatement, to say the least, that she is not being held back, she is not being restrained by those around her, saying, look, you've got to stop this. By all means, we should have freedom of speech, but there is a limit to how much offence you can cause. So we will see. We will see. Okay, let's move on to my second story, and let's look at more wider events, bigger events. And interesting story just came out that the US Embassy in New Delhi invited the farmers' leaders into their embassy for a meeting, as they euphemistically called it. They invited them round for tea, but basically representatives, diplomats of the US government invited some of the key farmers' leaders who are still protesting. Yes, those protests are still going on, and they invited them into the US embassy for discussions. And of course, the right-wing media in India, who as soon as they discovered this had happened, they're frothing. They're in a frenzy, thinking concocting all these mad conspiracies. What are the terrible Americans up to? Right. They're trying to bring down the Indian government. They are conspiring with the Punjabi farmers. Well, it was reported in the Parliament, one of the Parliament magazines in India, what actually happened. But apparently it was last week. The US Embassy invited the country's leading farmers, the leaders, around for tea. Apparently this claim did come from highly reliable sources within the parliamentary circles. And it's worth noting that the farmers' protests against the new agricultural laws are still ongoing. Yes, they are still there. It's not reported in the mainstream media, of course, surprisingly. With farmers firmly entrenched at Delhi's Shambu border, continuing their fight against the central government's proposed agrarian policies. So the mainstream media has largely, of course, ignored the farmers' protests, but their impact on the upcoming Haryana Assembly elections could indeed be significant. Absolutely, they could. And according to these sources, during the meeting at the embassy, the farmers' leaders openly expressed their frustrations, discussing issues ranging from MSP, that's the minimum support pricing policies, to loan waivers. Of course, lots of policies, new policies brought in by the BJP government. It is said that immediately after this, the Indian Foreign Ministry came into action and demanded to know from the US Embassy officials that how can their agenda of meeting the farmers' leaders of India strengthen the bilateral relations between the two countries? Of course, the Foreign Ministry in India were up in arms about hearing this meeting. So how dare you meet with the Indian leaders? What is this about? You have to tell us. They were, of course, deeply upset about the US allegedly conspiring with the farmers' leaders. But the US Embassy reportedly, they responded saying, whoa, calm guys, explaining it was merely a courtesy meeting. Since a large part of India's economy is connected to agriculture-based industries, the US was simply interested in increasing its stake in this industrial sector. Companies like Cargill, which focuses on agriculture-related products and, of course, have billion-dollar businesses, they're looking to expand their investments in India's agricultural sector. The embassy was simply exploring the potential of this roadmap. And with this explanation, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs had no choice but to remain silent on the matter. So what is it all about? Interesting. And yeah, as I said, the Indian right wing are really up in arms about this. As soon as they heard about this, they concocted all sorts of conspiracies. And they are, of course, referring to the fall of Hasina in neighbouring Bangladesh, which, of course, they blamed on US and Western interference. They blamed the US particularly for bringing down this anti-democratic Hasina government. Which, of course, was deeply aligned with Modi's anti-democratic government. And now, of course, they're saying, well, the next step, of course, they're now working on India. They're looking to bring India down through the same means. And, of course, they're now conspiring with Punjab's farmers to bring down the Indian government. Well, would you believe that or not? Who knows? But this story sits interestingly. If that is the case, then why then has the Indian Minister of Defence, Rajnath Singh, actually over the last few days been sitting down with the US Defence Secretary, Lloyd Austin III. And even just a couple of days ago, the Pentagon's press secretary released a statement about these meetings, very positive statement, talking about how India and the US, the Indian government, are aligning more and more closely, that clearly there is a lot of behind-the-scenes relationship building going on. And in this statement, the Secretary of Defence, Lloyd Austin, welcomed Rajnath Singh to the Pentagon. The two officials discussed ongoing efforts to deepen the major defence partnership between the US and India in support of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. And they celebrated progress across several bilateral defence initiatives, including efforts to increase supply chain security. We did, of course, talk about this potential deal of arms and hardware the other day. To enhance maritime security in the Indian Ocean region. To leverage a new agreement to strengthen operational coordination through Indian liaison officers at US commands. That's at a military level, the two militaries working very closely together on the ground. And advance co-production projects under the US-India Roadmap for Defence Industrial Cooperation. These priorities including jet engines, unmanned platforms, munitions and ground mobility systems, etc., etc. And they talk about actually lots of military hardware deals going on between the two companies. And Austin and Singh applauded the conclusion of a security of supply arrangement which will further integrate the defence industrial ecosystems of both countries while strengthening supply chain resilience. And they both underscored India's additional efforts through the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative to provide Indian Ocean region partners with unclassified commercial satellite data to enhance their maritime security and ability to detect illicit activity. Both officials look forward to the opportunity to meet again at the next ministerial dialogue. So, yeah, on the one hand, we talk about, well, is the US trying to undermine the Indian government? But on the other hand, actually, in reality, well, the two governments are still working very closely together. We have the two defence ministers in closed-door talks, talking about all sorts of military deals, but of course, alliances and working together both on the ground and strategically, of course, no doubt, to buttress China's ongoing aspirations in that region. So, the evidence very clearly here is that the US is working as hard as it can to try and bring India alongside. They are trying to work very hard to bring India as an ally, of course. India, in turn, is willing to entertain those overtures. India is willing to work very hard with the US to fight, or metaphorically fight against China, to work together militarily and, of course, strategically to build and bolster the defences around that Indian Ocean region. Because, as we have said on many occasions, China is working very hard to build alliances and, of course, build bases, simple civilian bases, which, of course, can be transplanted into military and naval bases very quickly around that whole area. We do know China is trying to encircle India because it does see India as a potential foe in the future. So China is working very hard to build its power base and its geographical bases around that region. So India has no choice but to work with the US to try and do the same thing around the region. But, of course, the big question always comes back to the fact, can the US and the West trust India? Well, as we've said again on many occasions, India does what is best for India. Of course it does. But at the same time, India may be forced to choose sides one time in the future. The question is, whose side will it be on? It is still aligning very closely with Russia. Russia, of course, being still a bit of at least on paper, a foe of the US and the West. So India trying to play a clever game, but as we said just the other day, India one day will have to choose sides, and the US is making it very easy for India to take the route or the path of least resistance and, of course, fall into line with the West. But ultimately, that will be up to India, James. So, interesting dynamics going on in the region.
It definitely is. And it almost reminds me of when we were kids at school and the new kid would come into the school and both sides, the jocks or the, whatever groups would try to get that kid on their side. And that's what's happening with the increase in the economic power and the world power of India, is that you have the Russians trying to pull them one direction, the Americans and the West trying to pull them another. And Modi's just playing both sides at this point. And to have, when you're looking at defense in particular, and he's building agreements and expansion of agreements with the US and Russia at the same time, should be quite alarming.
And of course, let us not forget that the US is well known for its ability to play both sides and play all sides at once for its own benefit. It is quite possible that indeed behind these closed doors, the US Embassy was in fact intelligence gathering. It was trying to find out, okay, what matters to the farmers of Punjab? What matters? What are the key factors driving the Punjabi farmers? Because of course, maybe the US is eyeing the future. Maybe it is wargaming the possibility that India could indeed break apart. And of course, the most likely region to break away from India is the northwest, of course, Jammu and Kashmir, and of course, Khalistan, the Punjab. So it may well be that the US is indeed intelligence gathering, because they know that Khalistan will be a likely ally and a very close ally to the US. So yeah, maybe they're trying to understand what drives the potential inhabitants of Khalistan, of course, the farmers. So yeah, both sides, India and the US, both playing a strategic game here. Who knows? Let's see how the chips will fall, James.
Yeah, that's all we can do is take that wait and see approach. And again, if there's anything that the Americans or others can do to help the farmers in the Punjab region or as a whole, we touched on it last week, the amazing levels of suicides and other issues that are impacting that region. So, and anything that can be done to help them. I don't know that bringing in these multinational corporations is really the right solution. In my opinion, if you look at companies like Cargill, where they've entered other markets and how it's had a negative impact on some regions, it's definitely worth more to explore, because I don't know if that's going to be the solution to help the farmers in the Punjab region. So.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And we, of course, have always remained deeply suspicious of corporate, I was going to say corporate America, but the corporate world. We do know that the corporations really are in it for their shareholders, nobody else. Certainly they're not there for any philanthropic reasons. And of course, yeah, if Cargill and the likes of Cargill are eyeing the Punjab, it will be for obviously profitability reasons, which might not necessarily be in the best interests of the farmers of Punjab. But ultimately, it's money, and Khalistan will need money. So it will be a bit of a quid pro quo. I suspect that, the US drivers of this are hedging all their bets, and they're saying, look, we can bring in all this money in the form, unfortunately, of corporate America, but we can bring huge investment into the Punjab and indeed Khalistan should it ever arise, or when it arises. But in turn, the Punjab farmers and the inhabitants of Khalistan, yeah, they say, well, we want your money, but in turn, we will also want your support in all sorts of manner. So, yeah, we'll see. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to our comments section. And as always, lots of wonderful comments coming in from our audience, and my daily thank you to each and every one of you that have contributed massively to our comments sections. So one of our shows last week, where we highlighted the current weakness of the Democrat government in the US. And Truthsayer, here's a comment, James. Apparently, we sound like a Pakistan-sponsored channel. Are we indeed sponsored by Pakistan?
Not as far as I know. At least I'm not seeing those checks, Angus. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually an often quoted accusation against anybody who is critical of India. And yeah, of course not. No, we are not sponsored by Pakistan. But I would say, even if we were, so what? It's free speech. It doesn't matter who sponsors us. It is absolutely our right to have a contrary view, to question and hold the Indian government to account. It doesn't matter where that comes from, who's driving it. It is good for democracy that there is always a counterbalancing voice. So again, my argument to you, Truthsayer, is it doesn't matter if we are sponsored by Pakistan. The point is that we are providing an alternative opinion. You don't have to believe it, but if we provide evidence, then believe it. So, but the reality is, no, of course not. We're not sponsored by Pakistan. We are in fact sponsored by some very motivated people in the Sikh community. We are also, and I would add to that, sponsored by some very motivated people in the non-Sikh community who are very, very powerful advocates of human rights, who feel very strongly about the protection of the Sikh community, not just in the Punjab, but globally. They believe in human rights, they believe in democracy. So those who are behind our channel are simple believers in the basic, fundamental human rights. That's all it is. No, we're not Pakistanis. We are just a group of people who feel motivated to ensure that human rights and human freedom extends across the world and of course in India. And we are concerned about what's happening in India. We are lovers of India. As I keep reminding any of our critical audience, we love India, we love its people, but we are concerned about your government. That's all that we are here for. So, but thank you nonetheless for your comments. And if you think we sound like a Pakistani sponsored channel, sorry, watch somebody else. Now, S. Baines says, we're referring back to Mr. Gupta, who currently is in the custody of the US government. Gupta's acting to save his own skin, and it's not surprising. And looking forward to the trial to understand the criminal network that India is running in the West. In fact, are we all? We are fascinated to hear what may or may not come out of Mr. Gupta's interrogation. Well, Gurdeep Singh says, well, he's just a criminal. He's telling lies to save his ass. Well, of course he is. But Kamaljeet Singh says, it doesn't matter. This is an interesting point. Irrespective of his statement, no country will openly acknowledge their operations. They'll just say it was a rogue agent acting to get away with it. The CIA have done it for decades in the past. Even the Saudis did the same in the Khashoggi case. Israel, Iran, Russia, etc. Don't hope for anything significant happening to the government of India, even if he is convicted with proof. Yeah, and I think this is the reality, James, that we've mentioned on many occasions, is that, yeah, it doesn't matter what Nikhil Gupta comes out with. He will, I'm sure, come out with all sorts of fascinating, interesting pieces of evidence that probably will implicate the Indian government. Will the Indian government be held accountable publicly? No, probably not. And we, the ordinary people in the street, will probably never actually hear what he admits to and who indeed is involved in this conspiracy. But that's just the way of the world. What matters then is how the US government and its allies react to this behind the scenes. Because once they have that evidence, they can then essentially strong-arm India to say, look, we can tell the world what you've been up to unless you do X, Y, Z. So it's leverage. All it is leverage behind the scenes. And unfortunately, leverage that we will never hear about, James, will we?
Exactly. And that's something that, the point that he brought up about it being, the CIA has been doing this for forever. So have other governments. And absolutely, we've addressed this in the past. So we do recognize that it is something that happens around the world. We're not only blaming India as the only one that's, operating in this manner on foreign soil. So we do get it, and we do agree with you on that point.
Yeah, there's no doubt all intelligence services. I mean, God, you only need to watch Netflix series on a regular basis to know all sorts of shenanigans that all the intelligence services, CIA, MI6, they're all up to it. All of them are. Mossad, particularly, another example. It's a secret war that goes on every day behind the scenes that we will never be a party to. That we only get probably 1% of what actually happens beneath the surface. They are fighting this war all amongst themselves, and we are the last people to hear about it, but we have to rely on our own intelligence services to protect our own nation's interests, as indeed, hopefully, they do. So, S. Baines' final comment on this is
99% of what they're doing is so boring that we don't hear about it because we just, don't pay attention unless there's something exciting about it, and that's just
absolutely
reality.
Indeed. I have heard that 99% of their work is utterly tedious, and it's only 1% that is actually, I'm not even sure it's James Bond, but it's certainly not as exciting, perhaps, as it is portrayed. So S. Baines says, the point is that India is not the West's friend and is not dependable. Their guilt has already been confirmed. No one trusts them anymore. Yeah, and I think this is the point. And when I come back to leverage, it's the reality is whatever is uncovered it means that then the West can draw its own conclusions about India. If they find that the Indian government is indeed implicated in this plot, then they know they cannot trust the Indian government. And that in turn has its implications on every nation's policy towards India. Absolutely. If we know we cannot trust India, then our policies are then shaped based upon that, despite all the public or diplomatic language. So a very valid point. Now, here we go back to Vinod Sharma, the Sunday Guardian, the owners, the owner of the newspaper or the news outlet that reported that interview, and we did talk about the killing of that poor model 20 odd years ago, and it was the son of the owner of the Sunday Guardian who was finally convicted and imprisoned for that crime. Cruella says the rich commit the crime, the poor pay for it. Either they pay off the parents of a poor person to stand trial, or they just nab some poor soul to stand trial for the crime. And basically it's not democracy. Yeah, and I think this is the point. As in fact we even alluded to, there was talk that Vinod Sharma, to protect his son, actually paid off not just witnesses, but actually tried to bribe or pay somebody, a Sikh, to actually take the rap for it. So yeah, unfortunately, this is the way of the world. In fact, it's almost the world over, sadly, is that the rich get away with all sorts of stuff. It's just the sad way of the world. If you're a billionaire, you can get away with a lot. And I would quickly refer to Jeffrey Epstein, is that don't upset your fellow powerful, wealthy and powerful, otherwise they will turn on you too. But that's another conspiracy, James, that maybe we won't go down.
Exactly. It's like that meme that was out there, it's a picture of Epstein saying, "Don't ask Hillary to be your Valentine." I did, and she just left me hanging.
Ooh. Yeah, and I think this highlights the very point that whether you're in India, whether you are in the US, if you are rich and powerful, you can get away with an awful lot. And it is only up to us, the ordinary folk in the street, to try and do our best to hold these people accountable. So, Mohan Danoa makes the same point. The rich... Excuse me. The rich and powerful in India are never guilty of any crime, no matter how many witnesses there are. Yeah, because of course, Manu Sharma, who pulled the trigger, was witnessed by many, many people and still managed to get off in the first trial. But also then makes the point, every Sikh in the world who does not agree with the Indian government is labelled a terrorist by them. Yes, absolutely. How often have we highlighted this very point? If you are a political opponent of the RSS and the BJP, you are branded a terrorist. I don't even need to repeat this. It comes up on regular occasions. They are still perpetrating this ridiculous myth that Khalistani campaigners are terrorists. And yet, where's your evidence? That evidence has been presented to the Canadian and US governments, and what's happened to that evidence? No, it hasn't been buried and ignored. It's been considered by the CIA, by the CSIS in Canada. It has been considered and they have been examined, and they are not terrorists. If they were, they would be on trial and convicted as such. So, Jatinder Singh. An interesting suggestion here. To make your show popular worldwide, if you're in a taxi, limousine or any rideshare company, the driver should actually broadcast via Bluetooth our show. And so that the listeners, anybody riding in these cabs or taxis or ride shares, they can listen to Satluj. They can say, who is this channel? And the driver can say it's Satluj TV. They may spread this show to other friends and families. Well, thank you for this great suggestion. I don't know how practical it is. We are broadcast on the internet, of course, via YouTube, but how on earth we would reach all these taxi firms? But a good idea. But feel free to suggest it next time you take a taxi or a rideshare. Suggest it to the driver, particularly if they happen to be a Sikh. Mention that Satluj TV exists. We are here. Broadcast it to your passengers. So yeah, spread the good word, as we say regularly. Right. I had a very, very interesting interview with an ex-army officer, Colonel Singh, last week. And on the face of it, it's a very dry subject, the Constitution of India. I mean, it sounds a deeply boring subject. Well, believe me, it is absolutely not. The Indian Constitution has cropped up regularly in many of our shows, and always, I would say, in a negative light. My interview with Colonel Singh is the author of a really, really good book, and it's basically the Indian Constitution simplified. Colonel Singh is one of the very, very few people in the world who has actually read the documentation that contributed to the writing of the Indian Constitution. He is an expert, one of the few experts actually on the Indian Constitution. He knows the Indian Constitution inside out. He actually can tell you what went on and what created the Indian Constitution. And he, in our fascinating interview, watch this interview if you really are interested to know, firstly, how the Indian Constitution came about, but secondly, the thumbnail, Stalin's baby. Yes, shocking as it may seem, the Indian Constitution was essentially shaped and has evolved around communism. We talked regularly about this relationship between the Indian government and Moscow and the former Soviet Union, and these days, of course, Russia. Well, Russia, the Soviet Union, heavily influenced the formation of the Indian Constitution. The evidence is there, it's all there. Colonel Singh uncovered it. And even, of course, yes, Indira Gandhi, who we know for a fact was paid regularly. It was financed by the Soviet Union, by the KGB. Yes, even she actually amended the Indian Constitution to insert two key words related to communism, secular and secular and socialism. Those two words were inserted deliberately by Indira Gandhi in the 1970s into the Indian Constitution on command of Moscow. So watch that podcast. It's quite revealing. It's quite shocking. And of course, most Indians, not most, almost all Indians have absolutely no idea what actually is in the Indian Constitution, despite what they claim to say, despite they'll quote it here and there, but they actually don't understand what actually they're saying and what they're quoting. Watch this podcast. It's very, very revealing. And I beg your pardon to this commenter. I must credit this commenter afterwards, but thank you. For some reason, maybe your name is just a dot. I don't know. But anyway, but thank you to this commenter. He said, basically, the Constitution of India is an integration of communism and Hinduism. Oh boy, it absolutely is. Watch that podcast. And Kuljit Mangat says, Mr. Singh and Mr. Angus, thanks for this podcast. I did not know any of these trees. Yeah, and this comment typifies problem, I would say, everybody in our audience. You really do not know the truth of the Indian Constitution. Watch the podcast. It is quite shocking. Yeah, James, we all talk about how wonderful constitutions are. How many of us have read any of our constitutions? Now, here in the UK, we don't have a written one. In the US, they have a written one. Does Canada? I actually don't know about Canada's constitution. Do you know?
Well, we refer to ours as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as opposed to a constitution. And it works on the same principles, but again, it's not as, how would we put it? It's not worshipped as much as, the U.S. Constitution will say.
Yeah, and it's interesting you use that word worship because actually it came out of the podcast. Colonel Singh mentioned that the Indian constitution has almost become a document of worship. It's almost become a sacred text amongst Hindus. You know, they worship this document. They're forever quoting it. They almost treat it as a sacred script. But in fact, most of them don't even realise actually its origins and where it's come from. And of course, this huge Soviet Union influence. It's quite scary actually. And again, it's very indicative of what went on in those early post-partition years. And of course, one other key thing that came out when the Constitution was hurriedly put together in 1949-1950 is that the 300 odd people, the committees that were created, were of course nominated by the ruling elite, by the Brahmins. So of course all the input came from the ruling elite. And of course, unsurprisingly, the Constitution was then drafted and then finalised, ratified. In fact, it wasn't ratified, it was just rubber stamped. It was created to protect the ruling elite forevermore. Unsurprisingly, that's why we still have issues in India, because the ruling elite wrote the Constitution essentially to protect the ruling elite forevermore. So, right, our final set of comments. Let's try and rush through these now because we're running out of time. A very long, very interesting comment from Aman DK. If Khalistan comes into existence, it would have a domino effect. Yes, we talk about this domino effect very regularly, about how other parts of India will probably break away, seeing the benefits of Khalistan. But the comment here, the point being made here, is that the strategists in India know this. Of course, they're not stupid. They do realise that this domino effect could happen. And what they're worried about is particularly the Hindu religion. And this comment, the point being made here, is that the nations would break the religion. It would break the absolute backbone of the Hindu religion, the caste system. Yeah. Well, the Dalits, who constitute the majority of the Indian population, the untouchables, they've been oppressed for centuries now. Indeed, they have. Dalits don't want to be part of the Hindu religion and don't identify themselves as Hindu. So just imagine if India breaks, where would the Hindu religion go? And the fight is not to prevent Khalistan, but in fact to protect Hinduism. Well, interesting you say this because, yeah, the Dalits are actually primarily Hindus. But that is, if you go back to the days of the 1940s, 1950s, and particularly the negotiations, and Dr. Ambedkar, and watch our previous podcasts about this, is that Dr. Ambedkar represented the Dalits. And at one point, the Dalits there was a possibility that these hundreds of millions of Dalits could have converted to Sikhism, because Dr. Ambedkar himself wanted to convert to Sikhism. But he was basically pressured into not becoming a Sikh. In fact, I think he became a Buddhist in the end. But he was pressured by the ruling elite of India, Mahatma Gandhi amongst them, to not convert to Sikhism, because they realised if Ambedkar converted to Sikhism, then the Dalits, hundreds of millions of Dalits, would convert to Sikhism. You imagine if India was now hundreds of millions of Sikhs in the form of the Dalits, it would be a very different dynamic now. So yeah, a very interesting point brought out here, that actually the fight here, the BJP, etc., are fighting the breakup of India, not so much for geographical reasons and territorial integrity, but in fact to prop up Hinduism. I would actually personally disagree with this. I would think that India, certainly the cow belt and the bulk of the central India, would remain Hindu. I think it would be this Hindu Rashtra that they talk about, and the other parts of India would break away, and well, they would go whichever way they went, religiously speaking. But I don't know if this is true or not. But it's a very, very interesting comment, and it does, add a very different dimension to this whole dynamic, James. Quite an interesting concept.
That it is, Angus, and I think that I don't necessarily agree with all the points, but I love the fact that that this viewer took time to place it all and to share it with us.
Yeah, and it would be interesting if and when the breakup of India does come, what would the Dalits do, given the opportunity? Because of course they would either remain in slavery in the caste system and remain Hindus. But I have absolutely no doubt, as this commenter mentions, that Khalistan coming into existence, of course, it is the invitation would be extended to all the Dalits of India. Come and join us in Khalistan. You can stay Hindus if you wish, because of course Khalistan will be an equal opportunity nation, but it is quite likely that these Dalits would convert to Sikhism. So yeah. Verdi, this terrible story of this ongoing violence against women, reports this awful story. And in fact, I did see this story and I didn't want to report it because it actually was too upsetting. 2 little girls were raped by someone from an elite family. The police haven't arrested the man, and they're trying to basically hush up the case. When Modi bestrides the world stage, he boasts all this BS and his cronies, RSS members, Modi, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, absolutely. Modi bestrides the world stage, as indeed he is at this very moment. He is due to visit the US in the next couple of months. And yeah, of course, at home, he's trying to bury this cultural issue where awful situations, awful events, incidents like this can happen. And the wealthy have the power and the ability. The Indian legal system is still so corrupt that it allows the wealthy to escape justice, particularly for crimes that are just unspeakable like this. Mohan Anwar says, farmers in Punjab, this is a great point. I love this point. The farmers in the Punjab should just grow just enough crops to feed themselves and their families just for a couple of years. Not enough to export. What's India going to do about that, eh? And Jat Advari extends it to another level. Says, yeah, and of course, Punjab, the Five Rivers state has all this wonderful water, this wealth of resources, natural resources, the water. It should save its own water as well. What's India going to do when suddenly the breadbasket of India, the 5 rivers in those states, those northwestern states, say, no, you're not having our water, you're not having our agricultural products. What are you going to do about it? Sadly, unfortunately, the reality kicks in, and I'll tell you exactly what Modi will do. He will take it by force. He will take, if you only grow enough for your families, he will take that grain and those products from you and from your very own tables, and he will take it for himself and his own cronies. That's how the RSS and the BJP operate. So in theory, absolutely, great idea. In practice, yeah, all you're going to do is highlight just how brutal and ruthless the Indian regime is. But maybe that's what it would take. Maybe that is what it would take to be that catalytic event to break up India. Who knows? And the final comment of the week, indeed. Cruella. You guys just let us know if the Indian government does make us an offer to buy us. We'll do a fundraiser and pay more than what they offer you guys. Well, thank you. And the sentiment on behalf of James and myself is very much appreciated. I would say no offer has yet been forthcoming from the Indian government, I'm delighted to say. But yeah, James and I are very appreciative, are we not, for our wonderful audience, our supportive audience. We absolutely love the comments like this. Thank you for that. James, a nice comment, eh?
I responded to that one, actually. I told him that no matter what the money, we wouldn't sell our ethics, and that's what we're here for, to bring the truth and to report with an ethical responsibility. So not to worry, we're not going anywhere. We are here for you.
So it may well be one day we may have to put out the begging bowl on a GoFundMe page or something saying, help, we're poverty stricken or whatever. But hopefully we won't get to that point. Long live free speech. So on that note, that is it for Perspectives for this week. And as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, we will be just taking a short break for a few days just to recharge our batteries. But we will be back, God willing, next Tuesday with our next show of Perspectives. So please make sure that you tune in next week and join us once again for Perspectives. But that is it for now. Don't forget, please do send us lots of comments, because we need lots of comments to report on next week for next week's show. And of course, with an absence this week, we will be missing your comments. So please do send us lots of comments, lots of interesting comments and lots of educational comments, as you always do. We know we can rely on each and every one of you. But of course, you can, of course, send us a message to message@saligetv.com if there's anything you'd like to tell us, if there's any stories you'd like to highlight to us, or anything that you just don't want to put in the public comments. Do send us an email directly. But until next week, thanks so much for watching. You have been Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. I look forward to seeing you all again next Tuesday. We'll see you next Tuesday.